Now, the proposed tobacco bill has received mixed reaction from the public. It's actually called the Tobacco Products and Electronic Delivery Systems Control Bill and was presented in Parliament back in May. It proposes new regulations such as a complete ban on the showing of all tobacco and tobacco-related products across all retail channels. Concerns have now been raised about the possibility of this leading to an increase in illicit trade, while, of course, there are people who support the bill in its current form. Let's get you, at least some perspective on this, bringing our experts to weigh in on the discussion. Dr. Kgosi Letlape is currently the president of the African Harm Reduction Alliance. Dr. Sharon Nyatsanza is the Deputy Director of the National Council Against Smoking. To both our guests, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thanks so much indeed for making time. It's the kind of bill I think that would affect everyone, irrespective of whether or not you do smoke. But Dr. Letlape, let me first get your take. Concerns being raised that this is more leaning towards criminalizing those who are dealing with tobacco products than regulating the industry.
Yes, if you look at the bill, there's a lot about prohibition and criminalization, which is a step backwards. If you look at what is being proposed around marijuana and dacha, we are decriminalizing and regulating. But here, we are prohibiting and criminalizing. And that is a major concern. And it should concern all of us. This bill affects people who smoke and those like me that are passive smokers, that live with people who smoke.
Yeah, and I suppose for the passive smokers, there is this hope, Dr. Sharon, that would move into a society where if you don't want to, in fact, be affected by those who are smoking, you can actually have that option. And I suppose in some ways this is what the bill's also trying to achieve?
No, definitely. That's a key part of what the bill is trying to achieve. The bill not only affects smokers, like Dr. Letlape already said, but also non-smokers. Non-smokers also have a right to clean air. And this bill is basically trying to empower non-smokers to be able to raise their voices when they don't want to be affected by secondhand smoke. And I think that really is a key part of any tobacco control policy. But if you just try and imagine that years back in the 1990s, people used to be allowed to smoke in aeroplanes. But that is now a thing of the past, and that is because of policy. And a key part of policy is changing social norms. We've also, for example, penalties, even in the existing laws. But the aim is not to criminalize. The aim is actually to deter and to basically change social norms on what's acceptable and what's not.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think when you come up with sentences ranging from 3 years to 20 years for a behavior, you are criminalizing that act. The other major problem is that our homes are being turned into crime scenes. It's invasion of privacy. This bill is written like, as South Africans, we are unable to make choices for ourselves. We have no agency. We can't think. And, it's when you look at the type of constitution that we have, this bill falls foul of personal human rights. I am not going to be dictated to. The other major problem is lack of differentiation, where things that are less harmful are considered as harmful as combustible cigarettes. The WHO has lost its mind when it comes to tobacco harm reduction. We do harm reduction in many other things. Drug addiction, we do harm reduction, where we give people methadone. Needle exchanges, we do harm reduction. We are decriminalizing sex work. We are accommodating people that have certain preferences. Here, we're criminalizing it. Now, the issue about that we've come a long way is true. And we have absolutely no problem. And I support the FCTC as it was written for combustible cigarettes. When it was conceived, there were really no alternatives except for snus in Sweden, which has been used for more than 50 years with great public health results. Now, the problem, when you start saying that smokes are the same, that is not based on science. You have countries like the UK that embrace e-cigarettes. You have a country like Sweden that embraces all forms of harm reduction, has the lowest incidence of tobacco-related diseases in all of Europe. We must not forget combustible cigarettes kill 1 in 2 of its users. And there's a moral and ethical obligation to give people credible information, to educate, not pontificate, and ensure that people have choices. There's 1.3 billion smokers in the world. There's 8 million people that die from smoking-related diseases, and 1 million of them are passive smokers. We're all in this together. Now, this bill does not make the differentiation. And remember this, that in terms of our constitution, people have rights. We can't come up with a bill that turns us into a police state. If people choose to smoke, there have to be safe spaces for them to smoke. Protect us, non-smokers, but don't treat people who smoke like they are criminals or they have no right. That is not acceptable. And people need to be given choices.
Dr. Sharon, let's get you to weigh in here. Thanks, Dr. Letlape. I mean, it sounds to me like it's a question of autonomy on the one hand, people being able to self-determine, but also there's a more nuanced discussion here about offering the carrot as opposed to the stick. I mean, if we want to promote healthy living, there are other ways of doing that as opposed to threatening people with jail time for being in violation of the current proposed laws.
So definitely. So, the focus on jail time is actually misinformation because that's not the complete picture. The sentences will vary depending on, for example, are you a corporate selling products or are you individual, etc. But in terms of just going back to the issue of harm reduction, the bill is actually based on human rights. It's based on the Constitution. I think just weeks ago, we saw a Sunday Times article on, principals calling the police in schools and high schools to help clamp down on vaping in high schools. There's a study in Cape Town which was done by Professor Van Zie, which shows that in high school students, 60% of them have to vape within the first hour of waking up, not because they want to do so, but because they are hooked to nicotine. So the bill is not stopping adults to use vaping products. Actually, it's not doing that. It's not banning. We have countries like Brazil, Ethiopia, which ban vaping. We have countries like Australia, which say you must have a prescription to be able to buy e-cigarettes. And then we have countries like the UK, Sweden, and South Africa included, which are coming in to regulate. South Africa will regulate vaping. It will not ban vaping because we do have a problem. And like you say, it is about competing interests, right? So the bill is trying to strike a balance. Yes, the adult can still vape, but what about the young person? We have to control how it's marketed, where it's marketed. We have to try and regulate the flavorings. We have to try and regulate even the amount of nicotine, etc. There are a lot of things to regulate on e-cigarettes because currently there is no regulation at all. They are being sold wherever, marketed wherever. So the bill is not banning, it's actually regulating. And I think that is really key. It's striking a balance and it is based on human rights. It's not trying to violate human rights. It's actually trying to promote human rights. So that is key. Those, I mentioned the 3 ways the countries are going around this. South Africa is taking the softest approach, which is regulating. Yes, we can disagree about, let's say, which country is doing what. There's no agreement on how exactly we must regulate. But there's kind of commonality that we must be regulating. For those who don't ban, they must regulate because we are seeing a problem even in South Africa. So I think that is something to just, to just remind each other. And if you think of the harm issue, it took so many years to realize how harmful cigarettes were. For e-cigarettes, we don't know the long-term health hazards yet. Yes, that's true. But the short term already are raising concerns. I think 2 days ago, yes, the American Heart Foundation already showed studies that vaping is as harmful to the heart as smoking. But of course, there are a lot of other issues that still have to be unpacked. But right now, there's clear evidence that we need regulation, and that is what the bill is proposing. Regulate how these products are marketed. Otherwise, we're going to see a whole new generation of addicts, because science is also showing that when kids start to vape, they are more likely to continue even to use combustible. So the bill is not banning vaping. You can still vape.
Sure.
You can still buy.
All right.
But we are regulating how this is happening. And I think that is a critical part to emphasize.
Right. Dr. Letlape, I'll get your take in a moment. Can I also ask this question as you formulate your response? I mean, is there at least consensus as a starting point that the laws in their current form don't go far enough? Are we in agreement, at least insofar as that is concerned? Dr. Letlape.
Currently, there's no regulation around alternatives. So we can't even talk about not going far enough. Remember, when this bill was written, none of these products were available. E-cigarettes have only been available since around 2013. Now, the FCTC was adopted in 2003. It's not appropriate for alternatives. Now, you see, the key issue is this, that there is no differentiation. Now, when people come and talk about youth initiation, which has been debunked, e-cigarettes causing heart disease, which has been, people have retracted putting those statements, EVALI being caused by nicotine when it was cannabis consumption through a vaping device, all those things have been debunked. And the key problem with this bill is that it upfront says it does not differentiate between the different types of deliveries of nicotine. It will look at them the same way. And that is where it is not science. It is like a diatribe. It's like they are a cult. It's like they are out to lie to come up with control. This over-exaggeration of youth uptake, we saw when we were fighting with HIV and AIDS, when people were saying, if you give children condoms, you're going to encourage them to have sex. This issue about gateway has been disproven. Now, this is the problem, that this bill is based on lies. You have scientists that are prepared to compromise scientific integrity and confuse the public. The key issue is to compare the alternatives with the harms caused by combustible cigarettes. And I agree with throwing the book at combustible cigarettes, but you cannot misinform about the alternatives and drive adults who smoke back to combustibles. You know, someone said the FCTC originally stands for Framework Convention for Tobacco Control. But the way the WHO is behaving, they are now using the FCTC to force combustibles to consumers.
Sure. Dr. Sharon, I have to give you an opportunity to respond to that. This bill is based on lies. That's a statement verbatim from Dr. Letlape, which is confusing for someone like me on the outside, because, I mean, the science must tell us one thing or the other. You know, there's that saying that numbers don't lie.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that this actually is a lot of misinformation. But if you look at who is the vaping companies, you see that the vaping companies actually are owned by the same tobacco companies. So that already then clarifies why there's so much creation of doubt, why there's so much misinformation, because the industry has to try and secure its future profits. It has to try and addict the next generation. The bill is not based on lies. It's based on science. And one thing about science, there'll always be, contradictory science, if you say so. For a lack of a better word, there's always science on the one side and science on the other side. And even if you look at WHO is not a self-standing organization. WHO is actually built, it actually rests on countries. It's not WHO, it's countries globally. So it's a global consensus that's being formed that we need to regulate e-cigarettes. So all these things, when you consider them, that's why you see that the bill is trying to strike the right balance, because of all these competing interests. Yes, the adults must be allowed to vape, but yes, we need to protect the kids. That's why we're striking a balance in regulating. We're not banning vapes. The issue of there being misinformation, it actually is the tobacco industry and the vaping industry, by the way, which actually is misinforming people. And like I said, it's the same industry. The same tobacco companies have now bought the e-cigarette companies. That is why there's so much misinformation. But definitely we do trust that the public will make the right choice, that they definitely will be making public comments and actually realize what the benefits of the bills are. We're trying to reduce youth initiation. We're trying to protect non-smokers from second-hand smoke. We're trying to protect health, trying to protect, the rights of South Africans. And we believe, we trust that the public will see through the misinformation and support the bill.
Sure, yeah. Speaking about that, the public comments. Okay, go ahead. Final bite, Dr. Letlape.
Ironically, she puts it correctly at the end where she said the industry bought vaping companies. Vaping did not come from industries. The modern electronic cigarette was invented by a pharmacist called Honlik, whose father died from smoking-related diseases, who was a heavy 2-pack-a-day smoker himself. But because of all this confusion, they've allowed the industry to buy this innovation from small companies that started it because of the confusion. And the reason the companies are buying it is because this is an alternative to what is profitable to them, the combustible cigarettes. And what has happened, because of all this obfuscation, they are confusing even adults who need to switch from a product that kills them. When you look at the bill, there's nowhere where the bill says we will promote harm reduction to adults that are dependent on combustible cigarettes to educate them on less harmful alternatives. It does not accept harm reduction in relation to tobacco. It does not talk about assisting the adult smoker, 1 in 2 of whom will die from smoking combustible cigarettes, to safer alternatives.
All right, Dr. Letlape, you're loud and
there are many countries that use these alternatives. And this bill does not make the differentiation. It goes out about youth uptake. I know of no youth that has died from smoking combustible cigarettes. But we see people that have COPD, that have lung cancer, that die. Smokers are human. They are adults with agency.
I think your point is well made, Dr. Letlape.
Right to get credible information to the alternatives. The WHO has to stop behaving like a cult when it comes to tobacco.
All right. Thank you. I'm trying my best to be courteous, but we are sadly out of time. I think both your points are well made, incredibly fascinating. The public comments are open until the 4th of August. And once again, whether or not you're a smoker, I think you're affected by this. To our guests, Dr. Kgosi Letlape and Dr. Sharon Nyatsanza, thanks very much indeed.